The well-appointed house. Every house has an outward appearance to be made as presentable as possible, an interior continually to be set in order, and incessantly to be cleaned. And for those that dwell within it, there are meals to be prepared and served, linen to be laundered and mended, personal garments to be brushed and pressed, and perhaps children to be cared for. There is also a doorbell to be answered, in which manners as well as appearance come into play. Beyond these fundamental necessities, luxuries can be added indefinitely, such as splendor of architecture, of gardening, and of furnishing with every refinement of service that executive ability can produce. With all this genuine splendor possible only to the greatest establishments, a little house can no more compete than a diamond weighing but half a carat can compete with a stone weighing 50 times as much. And this is a good simile because the perfect little house may be represented by a corner cut from precisely the same stone, and differing therefore merely in size and value naturally, whereas the house in bad taste and improperly run may be represented by a diamond that is off color and full of flaws, or in some instances merely a piece of glass that to none but those as ignorant as its owner for a moment suggests a gem of value. A gem of a house may be no size at all, but its lines are honest, and its painting and window curtains in good taste. As for its upkeep, its path or sidewalk is beautifully neat, steps scrubbed, brasses polished, and its bell answered promptly by a trim maid with a low voice and quiet, courteous manner, all of which contributes to the impression of quality, even though it in nothing suggests the luxury of a palace whose opened bronze door reveals a row of powdered footmen. But the mansion of bastard architecture and crude paint, with its brass indifferently clean, with coarse lace behind the plate glass of its golden oak door, and the bell answered at 11 in the morning by a butler, and an ill-fitting dress suit, and wearing a mustache, might as well be placarded, "Here lives a vulgarian who has never had an opportunity to acquire cultivation." As a matter of fact, the knowledge of how to make a house distinguished both in appearance and in service is a much higher test than presenting a distinguished appearance in oneself and acquiring presentable manners. There are any number of people who dress well, and in every way appear well, but a lack of breeding is apparent as soon as you go into their houses. Their servants have not good manners, they are not properly turned out, the service is not well done, and the decorations and furnishings show lack of taste and inviting arrangement. The personality of a house is indefinable, but there never lived a lady of great cultivation and charm whose home, whether a palace, a farm cottage, or a tiny apartment, did not reflect the charm of its owner. Every visitor feels impelled to linger and is loath to go. Houses without personality are a series of rooms with furniture in them. Sometimes their lack of charm is baffling. Every article is correct and beautiful, but one has the feeling that the decorator made chalk marks indicating the exact spot on which each piece of furniture is to stand. Other houses are filled with things of little intrinsic value, often with much that is shabby, or they are perhaps empty to the point of bareness, and yet they have that inviting atmosphere and air of unmistakable quality which is an unfailing indication of high-bred people. Becoming furniture. Suitability is the test of good taste always. The manner to the moment, the dress to the occasion, the article to the place, the furniture to the background. And yet, to combine many periods in one and commit no anachronism, to put something French, something Spanish, something Italian, and something English into an American house, and have the result the perfection of American taste, is a feat of legerdemain that has been accomplished time and again. A woman of great taste follows fashion in house furnishing, just as she follows fashion in dress, in general principles only. She wears what is becoming to her own type, and she puts in her house only such articles as are becoming to it. That a quaint old-fashioned house should be filled with quaint old-fashioned pieces of furniture in size proportionate to the size of the rooms, and that rush-bottomed chairs and rag carpets have no place in a marble hall, need not be pointed out. But to an amazing number of persons, proportion seems to mean nothing at all. They will put a huge piece of furniture in a tiny room so that the effect is one of painful indigestion, or they will crowd things all into one corner. so that it seems about to capsize, or they will spoil a really good room by the addition of senseless and inappropriately cluttering objects in the belief that because they are valuable, they must be beautiful, regardless of suitability. Sometimes a room is marred by treasures clung to for reasons of sentiment. The blindness of sentiment. It is almost impossible for any of us to judge accurately of things which we have throughout a lifetime been accustomed to. A chair that was grandmother's, a painting father bought, the silver that has always been on the dining table, are all so part of ourselves that we are sentiment blind to their defects. For instance, the portrait of a colonial officer, among others, has always hung in Mrs. Oldname's dining room. One day, an art critic, whose knowledge was better than his manners, blurted out, "Will you please tell me why you have that dreadful thing in this otherwise perfect room?" Mrs. Oldname, somewhat taken back, answered rather wonderingly, "Is it dreadful? Really, I have a feeling of affection for him and his dog." The critic was merciless. If you call a cotton flannel effigy a dog, and as for the figure, it is equally false and lifeless. It is amazing how anyone with your taste can bear looking at it. In spite of his rudeness, Mrs. Oldname saw that what he said was quite true, but not until the fact had been pointed out to her. Gradually, she grew to dislike the poor officer so much that he was finally relegated to the attic. In the same way, most of us have belongings that have always been there, or perhaps treasures that we love, for some association, which are probably as bad as can be, to which habit has blinded us, though we would not have to be told of their hideousness were they seen by us in the house of another. It is not to be expected that all people can throw away every aesthetically unpleasing possession, with which nearly every house 25 years ago was filled, but those whose pocketbook and sentiment will permit would add greatly to the beauty of their houses by sweeping the bad into the ash can. Far better have stoneware plates that are good in design than expensive porcelain that is horrible in decoration. The only way to determine what is good and what is horrible is to study what is good in books, in museums, or in art classes in the universities, or even by studying the magazines devoted to decorative art. Be very careful, though. Do not mistake modern eccentricities for art. There are frightful things in vogue today, flamboyant colors, grotesque, triangular, and oblique designs that cannot possibly be other than bad, because aside from striking novelty, there is nothing good about them. By no standard can a room be in good taste that looks like a perfume manufacturer's fantasy, or a design reflected in one of the distorting mirrors that are mirth provokers at county fairs. To determine an object's worth. In buying an article for a house, one might formulate for oneself a few test questions. First, is it useful? Anything that is really useful has a reason for existence. Second, has it really beauty of form and line and color? Texture is not so important, or is it merely striking or amusing? Third, is it entirely suitable for the position it occupies? Fourth, if it were eliminated, would it be missed? Would something else look as well or better in its place? Or would its place look as well empty? A truthful answer to these questions would at least help in determining its value, since an article that failed in any of them could not be perfect. Fashion affects taste. It is bound to. We abominate Louis XIV and Empire styles at the moment because curves and super ornamentation are out of fashion, whether they are really bad or not. Time alone can tell. At present, we are admiring plain silver and are perhaps exacting that it be too plain. The only safe measure of what is good is to choose that which has best endured. The king and the fiddle pattern for flat silver have both been in use in houses of highest fashion ever since they were designed, so that they, among others, must have merit to have so long endured. In the same way, examples of old potteries in china and glass at present being reproduced are very likely good, because after having been for a century or more in disuse, they are again being chosen. Perhaps one might say that the second choice is proof of excellence. Service. The subject of furnishings is, however, the least part of this chapter. Appointments, meaning decoration, being of less importance, since this is not a book on architecture or decoration, than appointments, meaning service. But before going into the various details of service, it might be a good moment to speak of the unreasoning indignity cast upon the honorable vocation of a servant. There is an inexplicable tendency in this country only for working people in general to look upon domestic service as an unworthy, if not altogether degrading, vocation. The cause may perhaps be found in the fact that this same scorning public, having for the most part little opportunity to know high-class servants who are to be found only in high-class families, take it for granted that ignorant servant girls and hired men are representative of their kind. Therefore, they put upper-class servants in the same category, regardless of whether they are uncouth and illiterate or persons of refined appearance and manner who often have considerable cultivation acquired not so much at school as through the constant contact with ultra-refinement of surroundings, and not infrequently through the opportunity for worldwide travel. And yet so insistently has this obloquy of the word servant spread that everyone sensitive to the feelings of others avoids using it exactly as one avoids using the word cripple when speaking to one who is slightly lame. Yet are not the best of us servants in the church, and the highest of us servants of the people and the state? To be a slattern in a vulgar household is scarcely an elevated employment, but neither is working in a sweatshop or belonging to a calling that is really degraded, which is otherwise about all that equal lack of ability would procure. On the other hand, consider the vocation of a lady's maid or courier valet and compare the advantages these enjoy, to say nothing of their never having to worry about overhead expenses, with the opportunities of those who have never been out of the factory or the store, or further away than the adjoining town in their lives. As for a nurse, is there any vocation more honorable? No character in E.F. Benson's Our Family Affairs is more beautiful or more tenderly drawn than that of Beth, who was not only nurse to the children of the Archbishop of Canterbury, but one of the most dearly beloved of the family's members. Her place was absolutely next to their mother's, in the very heart of the household always. 2 years ago, Anna, who had for a lifetime been Mrs. Gilding's personal maid, died. Every engagement of that seemingly frivolous family was cancelled, even the invitations for their ball. Not one of the family but mourned for what she truly was, their humble but nearest friend. Would it have been so much better, so much more dignified, for these two women who lived long, useful years in closest association with every cultivating influence of life, to have lived on in their native villages and worked in a factory, or to have had a little store of their own? Does this false idea of dignity, since it is false, go so far as that?